In chapter 8, 2-6, he has this encouragement before he hears you might say the bad news. Verse 2, then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And of course, that's a very old Jewish image of warfare. The Greeks and Romans did it as well, but it is an old image of the trumpet fanfare. Verse 3, and another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to mingle with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar before the throne. Remember that metaphor back before? The bowl of censer is an allegory for the prayers of the martyrs right before the throne of God. So in other words, your prayers make it. And I always picture this big old bakery. He's like shaking up a mix of cake. So he was given much incense. There's a whole bunch of prayers mixed together. Incense literally is a literal thing that burned in the temple, but here, of course, is a metaphor for God's hears the prayers right for his people. Verse 4, and the smoke of the incense rose with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel before God. That's a very old image that pagans believed, and so did the Jews, that when you had a sacrifice, the smell, this is supposed to be a fire here, when the smell went up high, the gods could smell it. And in the book, I like to give little footnotes as I go along from time to time to help you learn other things besides Revelation. In the Old Testament, you will often hear this description. Translators sometimes make it easy for you, but in literally Hebrew it says that he was pleased with the aroma. He was pleased with the smell. So the praises, he smells it. He's actually says something like it was pleasant to his nostrils. And that's because the old idea is that the Jews would argue, and many other pagan and ancient people, is that when they offered sacrifices and it burnt, the gods could smell it. Okay, I like that. You did a good job. Did a good job. And what the Jews would say is, yeah, he does that, but he also really likes the smell of your praises and your prayers. And that became a theme throughout all of Judaism, and here's the same thing. So in verse 3, when it says that incense mingled, and it goes up in verse 4, the smoke of the incense rose. Again, if you're in an ancient world, everyone understands what's going on. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. That's judgment. Signs of the theophany, a God appearance. Fire is almost always a sign of judgment. Or purification, like in Isaiah 6. He throws it on the earth. That means judgment time. And there were peals of thunder, voices, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. And that image of earthquake and lightning, go back to, remember we did this a couple weeks ago in Ezekiel chapter 10. That's images of when you're in the presence of God, it sounds like earthquake and lightning and flashes and peal. That's a very common. So you have this image that before the altar of God's prayer, he hears your prayers, because you're going to need it. And the vision is about to follow. And God is very present, but it's time for judgment. Verse 6, now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets made ready to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire with blood, which fell on the earth. And a third of the earth was burnt up. And a third of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. Of course, just a third. Notice that's about the people. I mean, the earth. It's not about people yet. There's no people involved. It's also incomplete. It's only a third. And the previous time we heard the 7 seals, it was a fourth. Now it's a third. The point is, it's just a portion. Verse 8, the second angel blew his trumpet, something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. That's an old image for Judaism as well and this sounds bizarre to me, but there's different understandings from apocalyptic literature of Jerusalem being like the mountain. Sometimes the stars in the sky are like mountains. There's different images for that. And a third of the sea became blood. Sounds like Exodus, right? A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. I'm going pretty quickly because I'm about to go back and slow down to unpack it. The third angel blew his trumpet. A great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and the fountains of water. So there he takes the exodus of the water turning to blood, but he divides it in 2 different things. So first is the third of the sea in verse 10. Verse 9, then verse 10 it's the rivers. Verse 11, the name of the star is wormwood. Wormwood is a nasty taste. It's a plant. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the water because it was made bitter. Before I go on, you'll see, hopefully by now, I've already alluded to this a couple times, what we have in the trumpets and later in the bowls in chapter 16 is a direct, deliberate parallel to the Exodus plagues. And if you put these in order, they're in different order, but they're there. Almost all of them are there. So, for example, in the trumpets, the first one, this is 8:6, that's Revelation. There's hail, fire, and blood. But in Exodus 9, and the plagues of Egypt, that's the 7th plague. If you remember that, that's your 7th plague. Later on, in Revelation 16, the seventh bowl of wrath is thunder and hail. So it's the first one of the trumpets, but it's the last one of the bowls. But they both come from the plagues of Egypt. It's modeled after that. The second trumpet that's blown as the sea turns to blood. That's clearly the first one in Exodus. It's the second one in the bowls of wrath. The sea turns to blood. The third one is the waters turn bitter. That's also the first one in Exodus. Water to blood, and third over there. In the second, we'll see there's darkness. There was darkness, but that was the ninth plague in Exodus. The fifth one over here is darkness. You see the pattern here. There's going to be locusts. I'm going to say more about them in a little bit. That's from the eighth plague of Exodus, but also from Joel 1:6 to 2-5. Then the sixth plague of Exodus comes over here to the bowls of wrath. They have sores on them, but in the bowls, it's ulcers. Then the second plague in Exodus shows up over here where there's frogs. And then both of them have something that's not in the plague. Both of them share, they come out of Euphrates. And I'll talk about why that is in a second, probably. What's interesting, it's from Euphrates. Does that make sense, basically? So what he's done is, when he talks about the wrath right here on the board, he's doing what he's always done, which is relying upon good Old Testament text to explain his vision. The first time it was 7 seals of a scroll unraveled. Now it's 7 trumpets. And then later on he says these 7 bowls, both of these he will model straight after the plagues of Egypt. That's not exactly the same, but they're real similar. But they're not exactly the same. And like I said, he has some separation. But again, the idea is this is horrible. So you got hell, fire, and brimstone, basically, and blood. And it goes on and on. It builds and builds and builds. Any questions or comments about that so far? I mean, so far what we're doing? Yes, sir.
On your list,
Yeah.
is outline, you say that 8:2 through the entire river.
I was with you until the one thing you just said then, which is, why would it be just toward Christians? And that's why it doesn't say that. It's especially toward.
That's what I mean.
Well, it's not just toward.
Especially? Well,
Correct.
Why would it be especially towards them if it affects the entire earth?
It does. Well, first off, it might not be especially toward the Christians. You can make up your own mind about that. But Talbert will probably argue, and I think it's compelling, is that it affects them because he's emphasizing the need for them to be sealed. But even then, you can make the argument, no, because it affects everybody, and because there are pagans mentioned specifically in chapter 9, verses 20 to 21, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I don't think it's only to Christians, and I don't put too much emphasis upon the especially toward Christians. But I do lean that way, particularly because of the sealing part. If I recall, later on in Revelation, there's not much emphasis upon that God's going to help you, protect you through it. Later on, if I recall correctly, there's not much protection, because it's primarily for the pagans, because he's not going to protect them. They just need to repent. So I think it's just a slight emphasis more than something else. But you don't have to find that compelling. You don't have to find that compelling. So just very quickly, 7 trumpets. I didn't do this, but green grass, 1/3 of the trees are burned up, 1/3 of the sea becomes blood, 1/3 of the ships and sea life, 1/3 of the waters turn bitter, 1/3 of the sun, moon, and stars do not shine. We got these locusts come up in a second. There's a 200 million man army. The kingdom of God is declared. So we have this boom, 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 boom. So it's in Revelation. There's nothing special here. You're going to see a very similar thing with the bowls of wrath. Swords reflect those who act the mark of the sea turns to blood, rivers turn to blood, beasts of the government, Euphrates, and so forth.
I mean, would it go boom, 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 boom? I mean,
That's a great question. Does it go boom, 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 boom? Yeah.
or do we know?
That's a great question. Do we know? He doesn't tell us. I tend to agree with most New Testament apocalyptic specialists that we should think of time, not always, always try to nuance this, but typically it should be understood more like a dream, where some things, they're sequential in ideas, sequential sometimes what flows, but many people say, I don't know, time doesn't really matter there, but this to happen to that, and I tend to find that pretty compelling. So I think these happen in sequence, but that's all I would push on it. But if someone said, but what if in Greek it just says, and the first blew his trumpet. And it says, and the second one blew his trumpet. And the third one blew. It doesn't say, and then he blew it. It says, and the first one blew his trumpet. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a great question. My own personal view is that it's in sequence. But we don't have any indication that I can tell that this took place over a long period of time, or that it's, I think the assumption is some period of time went by. I think so, because of what happens at the very end of the chapter. And that is, he wants people to repent. and they don't do it. So if it happened in the blink of an eye, it seems a bit bizarre to give them a chance to repent. So I think some kind of time transpires. I'm sorry, I wish I could do more than that. Okay. So he's modeling off of that, and he's building and building. And let me go back to verse 10 real quickly. So we have people, this is bad, right? So this is, well, bad for us, bad for the earth, bad for the people who are, because the earth, I mean, it's coming unraveled. It's chaos. It's the end of the world. And in verse 10, the third angel blew his trumpet, a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. That star from heaven almost certainly is allusion to Isaiah 14:12. Now, I'm going to piggyback on Isaiah 14:12. I'm going to give a little mini sermon on purpose because it's kind of a fun one. In Isaiah 14:12, it says this. You look in your own Bible, that's cool, or I gave you a translation. In Isaiah 14, Isaiah is having a vision, well, not a vision, he's given a prophecy against the king of, at the time, Babylon. And he's saying, you're going down, baby. You're going to be destroyed. Judgment's coming. And he says it a bunch of different ways, a lot of different metaphors, a lot of it. So verses 11 to 12, this is what he's saying to the king of Babylon, a real human being, okay? He says, your splendor has been brought down to Sheol. That's death, right? So that's the bottom pit. As well as the sound of your stringed instruments. You lie on a bed of maggots. That's not happy. With a blanket of worms over you. I mean, the point is, right, it's death. You're in death when maggots, get us. Look how you have fallen from the sky, O shining one, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the ground, O conqueror of the nations. Cut down to the ground. And the next few verses, he references these, what you might call very odd figures. Those figures he mentioned in the next few verses are beyond what I'm talking about now, but very quickly, those next few figures, they represent other Canaanite myths. So Isaiah is using common Canaanite myths, other religious myths of the time, as a metaphor for what the Babylon king is going to do, which is he's going down. He's going downtown. Okay, it's judgment, using metaphor. Here's where it gets tricky. The Latin version of the Old Testament is called the Vulgate. The King James Version, primarily comes from the Latin. King James does. Remember your King James Version, right? Well, in King James, because the Latin, it literally says in Hebrew, Hallel ben Shakar, Hallel ben Shakar. Right here, that in yellow, see how I made it yellow on purpose? O shining one, son of the dawn. In Hebrew is Hallel ben Shakar. Hallel, shining one, Ben, son of, Shakar, the dawn. And that literally means morning star, which they probably refer to Venus. It was common, that the actual planet Venus, or a crescent moon. So it's, even if it refers to Venus, it's still a metaphor. He's saying, you're like Venus that will fall. It's still a metaphor. Well, in Latin, the Latin way to say shining one is light bearer. Lux, Latin light, lux, I guess I'll write it. In Latin, it's lux fede. Lux fede, light bearer. Put that together, what does it sound like? Lux fede sounds like Lucifer. That's where it comes from. So Lucifer is lux fede, which means light bearer. And so what happened when the translators of the King James Version read the Latin translation of the Hebrew and it said lux fede, it became a name. Lucifer. You with me so far? So Hebrew, Hallel, the Latin translated Hallel as lux fede. Then the English speakers, King James, went, oh, lux fede sounds like a name. Lux fede, Lucifer. So they made up the word Lucifer. It's a made-up word. But then when they made up the word Lucifer, then those interpreters in the medieval, the 16th, 17th century and farther, then up to now, then they made up another mythology. Lux fede, Lucifer, is another name for and Satan. No, it's not anywhere in the Bible. It just became joined together with the devil. And then what happened, because I've talked to you about this, I've been accosted by fundamentalists. Then they go back and reread into Isaiah, Satan. You see how that process goes? Hebrew to Latin to King James to interpretation. Then they get interpretation and read back in Isaiah and go, see, Satan was there all along. And then they put that together with Revelation and all the other places, and it just gets this big old fat mess. So the bottom line is, it's not Lucifer. It's the shining one. It's Shakar. This has nothing to do with Satan. Nothing at all. One quick, so why am I bringing all this up? One is because no extra charge for this. So Lucifer's a made-up character, has nothing to do, it's never devil's name, it's never Satan's name in the Bible, ever. It's just completely made up. Just like the word Jehovah. God's never called Jehovah in the Bible. Did you know that? Okay, before I let you lose your faith tonight, I'll explain that in a second. So it's a made-up name, and that matters because what's going on here is he's referencing Isaiah 14:12 when he says, in verse 10, a great star fell from the heaven, blazing like a torch. He's just borrowing an image of judgment. It's just a metaphor. Like seeing the great king of Babylon, you're going to go down, you're going to fall. He just uses a metaphor, he uses an analogy. It's like when a star comes, like a falling star, you're going to be like that. That's all the point is. Just like a falling star. But because of translation after translation and translation and 500 years of history, now we have a made-up character called Lucifer in Isaiah. I think Satan is real. That's just not his name, ever. Yes, sir?
I was just going to ask, I've always been under the impression that Morning Star was a reference to Jesus.
Oh, thank you. He said, I've also referenced that Lucifer, Shining One was another one to Jesus. Yeah, I had a guy one time tell me, well, how could that be? Because his name is Jesus. My response is, what evidence do you have for that? What evidence do you have for anybody who says that it's a reference to Jesus? First off, Jesus is not alive at this point. The Word, the Son of God is, but he's not incarnated. This is around 700 BC. So they don't know who Jesus is. Why would Isaiah be talking about Jesus? Especially why would he be talking about Jesus? And a whole narrative where he's saying the king of Babylon is going to fall. Like all of a sudden, then I saw Jesus. Like, what? So I'm all for it. I just need evidence. And I've never heard any evidence for that.
And that's why it's done.
Falling star is lots of time reference to an angel. Huh. I've never heard that before, that angel. So the closest thing, the reason why later on interpreters associated this with Satan falling is because what Jesus says in Matthew, when he sends his disciples out on mission, they come back and they're going, whoa, it worked. We were able to exorcise demons and we preached the gospel and people repented. It was wonderful. And then Jesus proclaims, and I saw Satan fall from the heavens. And some go, see, that goes all the way back to falling. No, that's Lucifer. That must have been his name. No. Jesus' proclamation is just saying, woohoo, and it was party time. The point is, he's seeing the downfall of the power of Satan in the world. That's what most interpreters, you don't have to find that convincing, but most New Testament scholars would say, I'd be one of them to say, no, it's just a cry of celebration that evil's dominion's going down. It doesn't literally mean he saw, and I saw him, there he goes, look, I passed the hill. But it's just a declaration that, man, that guy's, evil's power's going down. The same metaphorical point of this about the Babylonian king, seeing them fall means they don't have authority anymore. Seeing them fall, yeah. Okay, very quickly. Do you want me to do this or not? I said about Jehovah. Very quickly. I don't know. Okay. In Hebrew, the Hebrew word for the covenantal name of God, God's special personal name, is Yahweh. Remember that? I said that before on the screen. Remember that? Alpha and Omega. YHWH. Yahweh. Or Yahweh, however you say it. Great question or point. It was irreverent to even write the name of God. That's right. But that's not why there are no vowels. They won't even write what I just wrote. What they'll write is a different Hebrew word altogether. They'll say Adon, Lord, Adonai, my Lord, which I'm about to say in a second. Today, in modern English, they do this. When they write it, they do G_D. They won't even write God out. So in Hebrew, it's YHWH, basically. Okay. But when you spell out the vowels, because in Hebrew you add vowels to this, it looks like this, Yahweh. Can you read my font? So you add A and an E. Okay. Since Jews will look at that word in the Hebrew text, they'll see Yahweh, but they're not going to say Yahweh. Stay with me. So they see these letters, but they say something else. And what do they say instead? They say Adonai. They say Adonai. Adonai literally means my Lord. So even when I took Hebrew, my Hebrew 2, I had an oral exam, I showed my Hebrew Bible with my Hebrew professor. And he says, start translating from Ruth. And so we had the same practice, just for fun, I guess. But when you saw the word Yahweh, we said Adonai. It's just a practice of reverence and whatever. Okay, so stay with me. So they see the Hebrew, but they say this Hebrew word. Then what happened over time is they made up a word. When you take the consonants of Yahweh, Y, and the vowels of Adonai, what does that look like? Yahovah. And the Germans don't, the Latin didn't say Y, they said J. Jehovah's completely made up. He's never called Jehovah in the whole Bible. Jehovah's a completely made up word. The consonants of Yahweh, but the vowels of Adonai. So one of my favorite songs, there's no God like Jehovah. I always go, that's right. There's no God like, I do that, but I'm just teasing. Y'all know that song anyway. Sorry. There's no God. So he's never called Jehovah. So all those books, he's called Jehovah Jireh. No, he's not. He's never called that in the entire Bible. It's completely made up. The King James Version still has it, Jehovah, but he's not called that. So does it mean you go to hell if you say Jehovah? No. It just means it's a made-up word. He's never called that. So I don't use the word because he's never called that. Okay, does I need to simmer or can we move on? He's still Yahweh. He's just not called Lucifer. Okay, so we have judgment, we have plagues, the star falls down. The point is, it's even the rulers. He's barring that image that the powers are going downtown, the good and judge. Verse 11, that name of the star, he even gives a name, it's wormwood. But then that's just, the point is it's bitter. That's from Jeremiah 9:14. The point is, it's like the plagues of Egypt. It's nasty. People, it makes them sick. Verse 12, the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, that a third of their light was darkened. So it's less light. A third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. Then I looked, and I heard an eagle. And is that your translation to say eagle? Aitu probably should be translated vulture. Vulture, probably. In 14:6, it should be probably vulture, probably. It's a great bird they had. Crying with a loud voice, because it's, of course, the vulture, because they eat flesh, they eat stuff, and that's later on the similar deal. He cries out with a loud voice, and he flew in mid-heaven. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Slow down. No, I'm just kidding. The woe is a common prophetic message. And the prophets, when they said, it's one of judgment. Woe to you, woe to you. Jesus does the same thing, particularly Matthew's gospel. Remember Matthew 11? Woe to you, Chorazin. Woe to you, Capernaum. Woe to you, blah, blah. If you'd received the prophet, that's a very common prophet message. And so here's this vulture or eagle saying, whoa, whoa, 3 woes, right? Because 3 is usually like wholeness. To those who dwell on the earth. Now we're shifting to people. So far it's been the earth has been torn up. Now we're shifting to human beings. Well, that's bad news. At the blast of the other trumpets, which are the 3 angels about to blow, get ready. He's letting you know, the earth just got beat up, judged. Chapter 9, verse 1, and the 5th angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star falling from the heaven to earth. All right, we already had to talk all about that. And, in fact, hold on one second. And remember, in 6:13, stars of the sky fell to earth. Anyway, it's a similar image. And he was given the key of the shaft of the bottomless pit. Now, I want to say something about verse 1 that Dennis, you brought up a second ago. A star fallen from heaven to earth, he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. In that verse, and maybe a couple others, that's the only couple allusions I know of in the New Testament or in the Bible, that star represents an angel, an angelic being. So if you want to use, if you still want to believe that stars falling can be angels, here's evidence for it. But in general, I don't know of many, but this might be one of the only places, if not the only place I can think of. And why is that? Because the ancient Jews thought when you look at the firmament, those white dots are either holes in the firmament where God's glory shines through, or they're angelic beings. It's very common to think they're angelic beings. So we would say, no, those are burning balls of gas. Millions of, no, what does that mean? They wouldn't. No. So he falls and he opens the shaft of the bottomless pit. And this is, again, just you have to deal with it. This is Jewish apocalyptic literature image that there's a big fat nappy pit that's for punishment. And he opens it up. It was locked. And from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace. This is a scary, frightening picture. And the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke of the shaft. So the assumption here is, of course, that it affects Earth. It's not necessarily cosmic. It's in the earthly realm. Now, if you go, David, where? Is it like past Nebraska? Or is it, I think we're asking the wrong question. The point is, it's in the earthly realm, right? That's the idea. I had a guy one time do a devotional, and he was convinced hell was in the middle of the earth. And he had some Bible verses for it. I just didn't find that compelling. So anyway, it's a big furnace, smoke comes up. Verse 3, then from the smoke came locusts on the earth. So imagine this ominous, horrible scene, this cosmic, gigantic furnace. Smoke, and all of a sudden, and then locusts fly out. And not any old locust. And they were given power like the power of scorpions on the earth. Now, everybody knows in this time period, if you go over there today, scorpions don't like humans, or most of the things. They're going to bite you. They're just a common enemy. They come to attack. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green growth or any tree, because that's just what happened to the earth. But only those of mankind who have not the seal of God upon the foreheads. So here we have people getting hurt if you're not a Christian. And they were allowed to torture them for 5 months, which is the life cycle of a locust, by the way. But not to kill them. And their torture was like the torture of a scorpion, and it stings a man. And in those days, men will seek death and will not find it. Listen to that, in those days. See that, Marita? In those days. So you hear the assumption is it's not happening. It's going to, obviously John knows it's not happening this time period. It's coming in the future at some point. They'll seek death, they're not going to find it. They will long to die, and death will fly from them. That is, boy, they're going to be tortured. In appearance, the locusts were like horses arrayed for battle. Their heads were looked like crowns of gold. Their faces like human faces. See, they look human. Evil looks like us. I mean, not evil, the punishment. Their hair was like women's hair, like the Greeks, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had scales like iron breastplates. No noise of their wings, the noise of many chariots. These guys are huge. They have tails like scorpions. Their stings, the power of hurting man for 5 months lies in their tails. They have as a king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. In Hebrew, it's Abaddon, but his Greek name is Apollyon, which both means destruction. So here's some artistic renderings of that. The right one's probably a little closer to it because he's got a human face and big old long hair there flowing. He's got a little crown. He's got the body of a horse. You look locusts. No matter how you look at it, these are some scary looking figures. Yeah, right. I don't know how we can surviving 5 months of being stung. Yeah, like that. That's right. Yeah, I agree. And of course, it's this, again, cosmic image of God's judgment coming to them. And if you hear this, you're like, what in the world? Good heavens, that'd be awful to receive that kind of trial. Whew, I hope he holds us because I want to be sealed. I want to be faithful so these guys don't get me. Yeah.
What is this seal of God upon their forehead?
Good. The seal of God upon their foreheads. That was all the way back. Yeah, I know I'm right there. I'm sorry. It goes all the way back to chapter 6 and 7. At the end of chapter 6, when he's talking about the same day, the great day of wrath, that's in chapter 6, verse 17. You look in 6:17. They ask the question. Remember in 16 and 17, there's judgment, the sky's vanishing up. The kings of the earth say, fall on us, hide us from the seat on the throne, for the great day of the wrath is come, and who can stand before it? The point is, who can stand before judgment day? In chapter 7, we learn who it is. Look in 7:3. In 7:3. Don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees till we have sealed the servants of God upon their foreheads. And here's the number of the sealed. So the sealed are Christians. But the Christians who remain faithful.
Now, it will be a seal. It won't say God or
Yeah, so it'll be a seal that says God. Yeah, I don't read it literally like that. Like I'm looking for a seal, like you put on a scroll, you put a stamp on it, and it goes, I don't think there's going to be wax sticking on her forehead. I do think, however, it's much more like saran wrap. Or like I said, analogy last week, I said, my great-grandmother used to make cinnamon apple jelly. She would seal it up with wax on top, right? It sealed it up to it, say, preserved. Well, they did the same thing in the ancient world, something like it. And so it's an analogy, it's a metaphor that God will help sustain faithful Christians through the tribulation, not from it, but through it, from apostasy, from giving up their faith. But John presents a good Jewish theology that he doesn't just seal them because they go, grr, they can't help it. There's like a tractor beam on them. He always says, but to those who conquer. So He spiritually seals those who are faithful. And if, when we don't like the nice, we want to clean, well, which one is it now? He doesn't let you do which one is it. I think John would say it's both. I have to stay faithful. And when I'm staying faithful, it sounds like the Apostle Paul in Philippians. Continue to work out your salvation in fear and trembling, because it is he who works within you. So you're working out what he's doing. There's a symbiotic. So sealing seems to mean God protects Christians in his time period and any time period from giving up the faith, spiritual apostasy. He calls that seal.
Well, you go through all of this and you think, are the Christians really going to be saved? Or are they?
Right. Are they? That's you say we go through all this. Are Christians going to really be saved? And that's a great question. So back in 9:4, don't hurt the ones who do have the seal on their forehead. Well, of course, the question is, all through Revelation is, I would argue, if John were sitting right here and we're preaching, he'd say, do you have that seal? Do you have that seal? Do you have that seal? Are you sealed by God or not? And that's a constant cry through those who are not Christians, which we'll see at the end of chapter 9 in a second. They want them to repent. If they would only repent and put their faith in the crucified Lamb, the one who was slain, and be washed by the blood of the Lamb, well, they're sealed too. He wants them to. But it's a cry to the Christians who are sealed not to give up their seal.
You kind of lose faith all the way through.
You kind of lose faith in all of that. Well, sister, don't lose faith. Don't lose faith. And I would argue this is exactly the point. We're supposed to see these profoundly scary images and go, I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want that kind of tribulation to happen to me. I'm going to be in it, but some things I'm going to suffer from as a Christian. Some things I'm not going to suffer from. I might suffer because of an earthquake. I might suffer because other aspects, peripheral damage of the tribulation, peripheral damage. But some things I don't have to suffer from, like this. So how much do we push this literally and say, are there literally going to be scorpion figures that attack people? I don't know. But at minimum, it means John is saying, when tribulation gets worse and worse and worse, it's going to get worse and worse, and you don't want to be part of the worst part. I tend to take that at minimum. That's what it is. So we're supposed to be scared, I think. We're supposed to be real scared and go, oh, my Lord, and then, oh, my goodness. I have one picture I'm going to show you. Oh, please, no.
Do you think the number of people sealed is like literal, like only 144,000?
Oh, good. So, yeah, back in chapter 7, is that right? So back in chapter 7, 144,000, we talked about this last week. No, I do not. I think all the numbers are symbolic in nature. And be real clear about that. Symbolic doesn't mean actual. It means symbolic. There's something greater to it. So, for example, the 7 churches of Asia Minor, to whom he writes the document, there are 7 literal, actual churches. But he chooses 7 because it's symbolic of all the churches to whom he wants everyone to hear it. So almost in reality, what happened was multiple churches in Asia Minor and in Lawrence, Kansas, and around the world have read these letters. Not just 7 churches. But he chose 7 on purpose. So 144,000, does that not mean there won't be 144,000 Christians? I sure think there will be 144,000. I think it's symbolic of something more important. And like I said last week, I think it's 12 times 12. So like the 12 tribes of Israel and 12 apostles. So Jewish and Gentile Christian equals the church. 10 times 10 times 10. 3 groups of 10. 3 is like 7, it's complete. And 10 is an indeterminate number. 144,000 is a lot. When this is the size of a house church in the first century, now say 144,000 of us are going to make it. That's a huge number. They can't fathom. That's a Bible study at Lakewood. I mean, that's Joel Osteen's. In other words, they can't fathom a church of 25,000 people, and they can't fathom that. So for them, this is a gigantic number. But I still don't. So will there actually be that number? Yes. I think there'll be a lot more than that. Just like there were actually 7 churches, but more people read it. Does that make? So I don't think it's limited to that. Jehovah's Witnesses do. My response to them is, you can believe that's fine. I don't find that compelling because I'm convinced this is apocalyptic literature. The genre dictates the questions I ask of it. If someone said, if I looked at the same kind of text and said, it says there were butterflies in your stomach when you met Brock, that's what she said. And I read my Bible, it says butterflies. And I go, what kind of butterflies was? I'm asked the wrong question. If you said, no, you misunderstand, I wrote a poem about what it was like to meet Brock. Well, I read the text. Is it authoritative to you or not? Well, yes, it's authoritative, but the genre matters. It's a poem. The same thing this is apocalyptic. We're supposed to ask, what does this symbolize? Not supposed to ask, how do I draw that? Which is exactly what I'm doing here. And I told you I won't do this much because it lends itself to think that we're supposed to draw everything out and figure out, now how? Later on, there's an angel that stands on the earth and the sea and he's gigantic. And I almost put past that, no, I just, anyway, that's, but nevertheless, I do this sometimes because I want the image to be scary because I think that's the point. Sometimes it's easier to image, like the 4 horsemen. And I don't think they're actually 4 horses. I think these are representative of tribulation. Yeah, and that's my view. I have to one picture just for fun. Is that all? Do you mean more?
The image of the 4 angels holding back the wind.
Yeah, the 4 angels holding out the winds. Yeah, like a big sheet. They're kind of going, hold on. Why does an angel hold back wind? I mean, it's right. He's borrowing an image of God's judgment. It's just different ways of saying over and over and over. If you said it in propositional form, this would be about 3 paragraphs long. But when he uses poetic allegorical, he has a plethora. It's like this, it's like that, it's like that, it's like this. This is what you don't want to do with Revelation. I couldn't help myself. Do not do this with Revelation. This is an example of what people do all the time when they do images. Oh, crown of gold and the faces of men, and look, teeth of a lion. So the point is they take these images and apply them to anything in modern times. Go, see, I told you so. I told you so. And they can do this with Stalin, with Hitler, with Trump, with Obama, with the Pope. They apply on and on. That's what I'm encouraging you not to do. I'm encouraging you to do not to do that. I'm encouraging you to do things like at least if you're going to picture something, at least picture what they said. And then figure out why in the world is that scary to them? Well, first off, it's just daggum scary. But secondly, because the scorpion, back then that was a common enemy in their time period. I'm not really baffled by scorpions daily. If I let out on the ranch, as the Caffeys do, well, I see scorpions more often. But I don't see them all, so that's not scary. But now I get that'd be scary. The point is context helps me there. If I go straight to a helicopter, what in the world? Come on now. I don't think helicopters involved. Okay, couldn't help myself. Verse 13, the 6th angel gets building, and now it's the 6th angel. And I heard a voice. All of a sudden I hear voices, and from the 4 horns of the golden altar before God, saying to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound to the great rivers Euphrates. Wait a second. We were just about to hear the 6th one. Now we're going to hear these 4 dudes. Boy, he's making you wait for it, man. He's making you wait for it. Why are they bound to the river Euphrates? Remember back what I told you? I said in a second I want to explain more about this. Look how Euphrates is different. Remember to the bottom? It's in the trumpets and the bowls, but not in plagues of Egypt. Euphrates was an actual literal river on the far east side of the Roman Empire. And Babylon, Assyria, and those dreaded Parthians all came from the east of the Euphrates. So I think the reason why the Euphrates is not mentioned in the plagues of Egypt, because that's in Egypt. Euphrates is thousands of miles to the east of that. Egyptians might even know what the Euphrates River is. But when John writes this, he knows exactly where Euphrates is. He's writing way over the Roman Empire. In other words, the time period and location. They would have no idea what Euphrates is, but they sure do. John does, and his audience sure does. And so, of course, is the 4 angels bound the great river Euphrates, because if you're a Roman, that's bad news, because right on the other side are the Parthians who attack them all the time. That's where the boogeyman live. It's like saying the 4 angels come from the dark closet, and some little kid's scared of the boogeyman. It's kind of like that. They come out of this river. So the 4 angels were released, who had been held ready for the hour, the day, the month, and the year to kill a third of mankind. The point is the time was set. God is not surprised. It's their preordained time for them to be judging. The number of the troops of cavalry was twice 10,000 times 10,000. Here, 10 times 10, but 1,000. I heard their number. He said, I heard it. I'm telling you what, I heard that number. That's kind of weird that he says that too, because very seldom does he say, I'm telling you, I heard it. Nevertheless, he says that, and boy, this is 20 million. It's 20 million. So for them, this is a gargantuan number. Gargantuan. And the time period, it's been I think about 20 million, right? 10,000?
Mine says 200.
Oh, maybe I was about 200. Maybe I didn't write enough zeros. 200 million. It's been estimated that Rome itself had about 1 million people, 1 million to 2 at the time period. This is an unimaginably large army of guys coming to kill. This is bad news. And this was how I saw the horses in my vision. The riders were breastplates the color of fire and of sapphire and of sulfur. Those are the same images that we saw earlier of that was poured out. Anyway, and the heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire and smoke and sulfur issued from their mouths. So see that here? No, it's kind of like that too. Anyway, and of course they have fire and smoke come from the mouths of the lions. So here are these images of an army that Romans would have understood from the east of Euphrates. They come, here's the bad guys, and their lions breathe fire. I mean, this is bad news. Verse 18, by these 3 plagues, a third of mankind was killed by the fire and smoke and sulfur issuing from their mouths. For the power of the horses in their mouths and in their tails are like serpents with heads, and by means of them they wound. So this is bad news. But he's still not done. Of course, that was just the voice that said, unleash the so-and-so. We still got to hear the 7th trumpet. Verse 20, the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, nor give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot either see or hear or walk, those dumb idols. Nor did they repent their murders or their sorceries or their immorality or their thefts. Now let me pause here for a second, because now we see exactly what John is trying to get his point across. Even when all heaven and almost looked like hell broke loose against them, the leftover people, not Christians, but the leftovers who didn't die, they still don't get the message. Even when God judges them, they don't want to repent. And he's demonstrating that humans are just some evil. Remember, it's apocalyptic. It's a present evil age. Humans are corrupt. And no matter how bad it gets, these awful images, and they're just, I mean, this is horrible. They still don't want to stop. They still don't want to stop. Let me say quick words also about them not wanting to stop. You need to understand something. I hope you do. Whew, I hope you do. Jews were always adamant, based on Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5, that you worship God alone, and you don't make idols of them. You do not make idols. An idol was a literal, actual thing. It was could be small, like the stand on which that phone stands. It could be little bitty. They could be huge, like statues. They could be 12 feet tall. And those idols represented kings, but they typically, which that could happen, they also could represent various gods. And when you saw an idol, the idea was that part of the land was under the god's authority and control. It's very much like having a flag. When you see the American flag, it means we've conquered or we own it or whatever. It's ruled by here. So even if you go to a foreign consulate in a different land, and that American flag, when you get on those grounds, right, it's ruled by different governing lands. You can't come do stuff that you do outside those gates because it's American land. That's what idols represented to them. So they got real sweet to idols. They might anoint the feet, pour oil on it, give them little food, little drink, burn incense to them. Be real sweet to the idols. And the idea is when I do that and I pray near you, that God who represents an idol is sure going to perk up. Say, thank you for being nice to me and my idol and myself. And the Greeks and the Romans, we have evidence throughout, including in Revelation. We've already talked about it earlier. We talked about way back in the Church of Asia Minor. They had ways of designing the idols where they had holes and pipes all through the idols, and they would take the reeds of the canes. They would take their vocal cords and so forth and turn into an instrument. And so these priests would come behind it and blow on it or talk, and it would sound like it's talking to the idol at the top. And that very elaborate. And this was common part and parcel. You didn't go anywhere in Roman society without seeing idols everywhere. And before then, you saw them all through Palestine. You saw them when the Jews used to worship. The prophets would say, stop doing that. And what was very common, I'm putting all this all together, it's just everyone did it. Egyptians did it, Canaanites did it, Palestinians did it, Greeks did it, Romans did it, everybody. And when you got married, you joined your gods together, you brought your idols together. And that's one reason why in the Old Testament, they were so adamant you do not marry outside of the clan, but they're not just racist, it's because they bring with them. So Jezebel and all these people, they bring their gods with them, and then the point is, they're so ready to worship other gods, they don't get it. So you can't marry outside your kinfolk. You can't do that because you'll start worshiping other gods. And so one of the number one rules in Judaism that nobody else had, let that sink in, was you cannot worship idols. Everybody did that. These crazy Jews said, no, you can't. Moreover, it says in Deuteronomy and in Exodus, don't make a graven image of me. Now, why would God say don't make that? He's not, I'm sorry, Protestant forefathers, Martin Luther, just because God doesn't like idols of himself and images. No, it's not because he don't like images of himself. It's because he doesn't want the Jews to think you can control them. Don't make an image of me. I'm not a creature like all these other, like the Egyptians like animals. They like their snakes and their all these other stuff. That's cool. And jackals. The Palestinians did other things. They look human-like. Greeks and Romans look human. The point is, you can manipulate the gods by being kind to their idols. And God said, no, do not do that. That's not how I want you to understand how I work. You cannot manipulate me and control me. Don't make an idol of me. Don't make an idol of me, and don't worship other idols. Don't do it. So, one of the number one sins, probably the number one sin in all of Judaism, is idolatry. Because it meant that you worship a God in addition to Yahweh. It was Yahweh plus. So you got an idol in the room? That's a big deal. The Christians will pick up the same idea when they talk to Gentiles. They're Jewish Christians. And I talk to Susan the Gentile, and I go, you were raised all your life worshiping idols. You've been going to the temple of Zeus, Asclepius. Pick a choice. You've been going to worship at the feet of idols all your life. Your parents did it. Your grandpappy did it. Everybody does it. It's like paying your taxes. You have to leave that behind. And that's why in verse 20, when he talks about they worship their idols, and that's why it's such a big deal to them. They have to repent from that. That's foreign God worship. And this gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood is what they made it out of. Everyone knows that. It says that in Jeremiah. By the way, some people think that text in Jeremiah that says they go down and cut down a tree and fashion it. They say, that's a Christmas tree. It's not a Christmas tree. There's no Christmas back in 8th century BC. I've heard people make arguments about this, on and on about it. Oh, my goodness. One guy in one class in my previous church got so upset when I talked about having Christmas celebration. Anyway, but notice in verse 20 it says, nor giving up worshiping demons. The Apostle Paul says specifically in 1 Corinthians 10:20 and in 15 other places, here comes these early Christians in the church. And Marita comes in, she goes, I'm a Christian. I give my life to Jesus. I'm a Gentile. Yay for me. Then Dennis comes in, a Gentile Christian. But then Dennis is still kind of hanging out with those, eating food over there. His friends still hang out, eat some idols. He got some family who goes to the temple. And Marita goes, well, if he goes, what's the big deal? I mean, I guess I can do it too. Well, then she's tempted to go sin again. Dennis might go, I'm not tempted. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians, we know those idols are worthless. In fact, what's really behind them, what's really behind those idols are, we use the Latin word from the Greek, daemons, demons, from the Latin. It means spirit. It became known as the evil spirit. So Paul would say, not only are those idols not representing a god, evil uses those idols. Stay away from them. That's what's going on here. So the bottom line is, I'm trying to tell you that in early Christianity, it was very common theology to say, because they're Jewish background, this is a big fat no-no. You do not ever worship other idols. You're worshiping a false god. 2, if you do, not only you're not worshiping another god, because those gods aren't even real, you're being used by demons. It's demonic in its practice. Yes, clarification. Correct. So when I say the word Jew, to what am I referencing? That's actually a massive debate in scholarship, how to understand the word. And I won't join that debate right now because it is a huge one technically of, is it Judean or is it something else, or Judahite? What's the proper, there's a sub-debate in scholarship. I'm using it, as it is common in scholarship, as a broad term for anyone who's of the 12 tribes of Israel. Broadest term possible. A person who believes they have a covenant with God via Abraham and the kings before him. It's a great question. So when I say Jew, I'm not referencing a time period, but Jewish theology in a broadest sense. But still it means something, because it's not Gentile. That's a good question. Not so much a time. Yes, I don't know who came up first, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Kathy?
Go ahead. I was about idols.
Idols, yes ma'am.
Okay.
St. Christopher, is Christopher an idol?
You know, like the.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, yeah, so these, you use the word St. Christopher, right?
Well, I don't think he's still a saint.
He didn't know, it's still, yeah,
No, but, I mean, you know.
All right. Well, that's good. Look, this is good stuff. It's relevant. Or St. Jude, St. Mary, St. Peter, St. whatever. Yeah, Are those idols? The Protestant reformers said, yes, they are too, and you can't put images of them. You can't do that. And that's one reason the Protestant, Martin Luther, Zwingli, and others, our forefathers as Protestants, would say you can't do that. I disagree with them. I don't think these people are by nature idols. I think in their time period, they lend themselves a lot to that understanding. But even a strict Catholic will say these saints and these images of a saint don't represent foreign gods. But the Protestant reformers, as far as I understand, I'm not a Protestant scholar. Mine was patristics, first through the 5th century. But from the Protestant scholarship that I've read, I think they would say the reformers they were bothered that the saints took on godlike qualities, who did things. They had special strengths like superheroes, which Roman Catholics still believe. So St. Jude is the saint of lost causes, or you have to talk to Mary to get to Jesus, those kinds of things. You can't talk necessarily directly to Jesus. You can, but it's better to talk to his kinfolk. They'll get to him. So in my opinion, modern-day saints from Catholicism, the benefit of the doubt is I do not think those are idols. I don't think for a second the average Roman Catholic thinks the saints represent other gods or even divine figures. In all fairness, I don't think at all. I think the Protestant reformers in the 16th century might disagree with me. I just don't find that compelling. I think if that's what they believed, I would say, then I think you've misread the Bible. Ancient Judaism would not have thought that. They wouldn't have thought that. When you saw an idol, you represented for God. It's like people who argue against the Christmas tree. We can't have a Christmas tree because it's a pagan tradition. I'll say, I don't worship pagan gods by having a Christmas tree in my house. For me, it's celebration. I look at my family photos and I praise Jesus. I don't turn into a pagan. If I were tempted by the Christmas tree to worship pagan idols, I need to put it down. That's a different story. If that's my temptation, to see that tree and go, oh, come on, Baal, I would not. That's bad news. So I don't think so. This term saint, little footnote, if I may, little mini sermons here, if I can, if this is related, because he calls the Christian saints. Saint, did you know this, just in case you didn't? Saint comes from the Latin word sanctus, which is, if you translate it from a different word, anyway, it's what the word we use for holy, or it means set aside. Hence the word sanctuary or sanctum. It means holy, set aside. And as I talked about before, which is why I really do not prefer to call that room a sanctuary. I do because I just do, but it's not a sanctuary. That's Old Testament theology. In the Old Testament, you had a sanctuary because it's holy place, holy ground in which you stand. That's not what Christians believe. Christians believe I'm a sanctuary. Everywhere you and I are, we're holy. Paul says in Corinthians, you are the temple of the living God. So I don't go to a place that's holy. When you meet a Christian, you met one. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians around verse 3, and also in 1 Peter, when he says to the saints at Corinth and those called to be saints, literally in Greek is those called to be holy ones. Well, who gives a rip about that? If your background is Judaism, you give a whole lot of rip about that, because a holy one, there's another word they use for someone who always wanted to live life like they're being holy and distinct from pagan culture. There was one role that always was trying to live distinct from pagan culture, and that person was a priest. And that's why in the Old Testament, when it says that he wants Israel to be a kingdom of priests, it's a way of saying, we want to be all holy, not like all the pagan people who don't have a covenant with me. The Christians pick up the exact same concept. In 1 Peter, when he says he's called to be priests. But now it's Christians who've been called to priest. And this is, okay, I will preach for a second. It's one of the most disturbing facts of the church in my experience, in my almost 20 years of ministry, is the fact that the church has almost completely gotten rid of this concept of holiness. It is not popular. It doesn't preach well. It runs people away. And as soon as you bring up the concept holy and sin or ethics or whatever, right away they're going to call you legalist. Automatically people will do that. And you can't turn a page of the Bible without talking about this concept of holiness. In the New Testament, Christians are called to be holy. We're called to be a kingdom of priests. We're called to be saints. And it's all through it. The Roman Catholic doctrine of sainthood developed centuries later and has nothing to do with the Bible. There you have to perform a miracle or purport to have a miracle. You have to be very virtuous and and you become VIP. That is not biblical at all. In the New Bible, in the Old Testament, faithful Jews are saints. In the New Testament, particularly priests and others, And the New Testament, every Christian, anybody who has the Holy Spirit is a saint. And we're called to do that. That's why he says to the people of Corinth, he writes to a church in a four-way split. They're fighting, they're four-way split, and he's dissension everywhere. They're fighting over the Lord's Supper. They're fighting over all kinds of stuff. Dude's sleeping with his stepmom, and the church doesn't give a rip. He says, some of you even encourage it. What is wrong with y'all? Kick his junk out to the curb. Give him to Satan in the hopes that he comes back home. What is wrong with y'all? He goes on thing after thing after thing, and he starts the letter out by saying, you're saints. You've been called to be saints, holy ones. I told you I'd preach. I'm done. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. And you're going to... David, there's no grace. Yes, there's grace. Yes, there's grace. Yes, there's grace. That's a great question. Is that the only people during the trial, or is that, will the all people be brought back? I just don't think that's an answer, a question that he asked. I don't think he'd answer the same, how do I say that? I don't think he has an answer for that question. I think if I had to make him say something, I think he'd say is, they don't come back to have the chance, they're living it right now. That every generation is living through some form of this right now. And like the analogy that Howard Marshall, the scholar, gave me, they're right on the verge of the line. So we're all in this trial period now, seals, trumpets, angels, we're all in there somewhere, every generation, every age. And I think John would say, they don't need to come back because they're living it. So every single time that some kind of God's judgment is acted upon humans, instead of them receiving that as judgment, they don't repent. They don't, whatever. Having said that, I just really don't think John thinks that all of the judgment he's describing has happened yet in this time period. In those days, he says, right, in those days. So he pictures it getting a lot worse. Then the question is, but does John picture it taking thousands of years? I just don't think he did. So if we push John on it and say, John, you said in those days, what do you mean? I think he would say, later on. I think he thinks the time is near. He says it 2 or 3 times in the Revelation that time is near. Later on, he's going to say, eat this scroll, but do it, but don't shut up because time is near. So I tend to have this both and quality. I tend to think he would say that any time a person looks at what's going on in life and hopefully they've gone through a horrible time in life, instead of crying out to God and I bottomed out, instead of repenting, they just say, forget him, I'm more mad at him, or whatever it is. But at the same time, I don't think he understands it being all just, I think all of it hasn't happened yet.
So we all kind of have our own tribulation.
So to repeat, so we all have our own tribulations and we all kind of decide whether we're saved or not.
Not that we decide if we're saved.
I know what you mean.
But we're sealed from.
Gotcha. No, I'm with you. I think in general the answer is yes. I think in general the answer is, that's why I'm always trying to be so fair. It all depends on how much John wants us to understand these images, quote unquote, literal. If he really means, no, David, there's going to be a time when these locusts pop out that have women's hair on it and a big scorpion tail, and if you haven't seen them yet, that's going to happen. If that's what he really is thinking will actually happen on earth, and a third of the sun is darkened, which we know in reality, if that happened, earth would die immediately because we need the heat from the sun. So my point, I would ask John, I think John would go, I don't know what to answer the question anymore. And if that's what he pictures, I'm not sure, that's why I go, I wish I could just say, here's what he meant. So what I tend to do is to say, I think he is giving these pictures of things getting worse and they're going to be awful, and they haven't happened in this time period. He says in those days, they're going to, boy, sure wish they could die, but they can't. Early on he said, boy, the kings are going to wish the mountains would fall on them to hide them, but they can't in those days. But then how much do we push those images of literal, actual? If we don't push it too hard literal, we can go to what you said, which is, then or you were asking, is it such that it's more nebulous, that the tribulation could be applied to us anytime? So I tend to lean that direction versus this literal, because I find more problems with that than I do anything else. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just means I find that more problematic. You start adding up literal things like a fourth of the earth and a third of the earth, he destroys all the mountains, and the next scene there's mountains. I don't think he's incompetent. I think it's apocalyptic. I don't know if that was clear at all. I'm trying to... Hold on one second. Susan had a question. Oh, Susan.
In case,
So we might not make it to this very end thing, so we have to make our decision during our chunk of time.
As is.
I think John would agree with you that we make our mind up on whether or not we're going to be assimilated or not, no matter the time period. I think John would concur with that.
Die with peace.
And die with peace. Down with peace, knowing that, that's right, that you were faithful to however that temptation and tribulation look like.
Because we all live through our stuff.
We all live through our stuff. That's true. I have that same view of you do, which is stay faithful no matter what we are. And remember, real quickly, remember the Church of Asia Minor, they're not all going through the same situation. But he wants them all to perk up and listen. So I think a similar thing is about the plagues and the whatever. They're not all going through the same situation, but we better perk up if someone goes through it. Dennis, I think you...
Well, I was just going,
So your view is that in the New Testament, you're saying the New Testament at large doesn't seem to have much of a pessimistic or negative anthropology, that we're just sunk, but the Revelation sure does have it. Right, and most scholars would concur with you, that the dominant view, if you had to pick one, it is negative, but there are several texts, like in Matthew, but in Jesus' message, he's not as negative in his anthropology as Paul is and other authors are. That's right.
Time's coming.
Right. So, and Jesus will say, repent. And we don't have any notion that they can't. He just demands they do it. So it's more like the prophet side. That's right. I agree with you.
That last statement, check that.
That's right. But the word you just used, I think it was verse 21, you said, and in this example that they can't. And that's a big issue in theology too, which I don't know if you know, that, just in case. It's the word can't. It's the word can't versus the word won't. And Talbert and other scholars' point is when there's a negative anthropology, it's that they cannot keep doing evil. The positive anthropology of the prophets tends to be they won't stop. Now that's an issue in debate as well, but I typically agree with that general notion that apocalyptic authors have such a negative view of what humans will do that it sure seems like they can't do. They're so stinking corrupt. They're just so corrupt. They're already over the edge. But I don't go all in with Talbert, and if I always do everything nuanced, which is scholarship we do all the time, if you always nuance, you can't really give systems and help up at categories. I think in general that's true, that they can't. I don't think it's fully true, because then you have to ask, I would think, you have to ask the question, why is it Christians can receive tribulation? Why are we called to conquer if we can't do it? If we're so limited, why call us to conquer? Just say either.
It's like saying we didn't have that option of choice.
Right. So it assumes we have the option of choice to conquer. Well, if we have the choice to conquer, it means maybe we won't conquer, or maybe we will, but not that we can't. But there are images in Revelation. It sure seems to be that they're so corrupt.
I got that feeling.
It just seems to. So I tend to lean the direction to say is they're just so corrupt. But in theological, particularly in Christian philosophical circles, there's this whole concept called total depravity that Calvin and others argued. They go into a lot about this, and I don't find that compelling. There's a lot of reasons there. Was it you? Who had?
Well, I did, but I just wanted to take.
It was the phone. Marita, did you have something?
No, I was.
Just the phone too. Vanna.
I was just thinking.
So do it. Vanna said that 1st and 2nd Peter seem to go very well with Revelation. Vanna, that's a very astute observation. That's one of the reasons why most New Testament scholars, well, virtually all New Testament scholars, think that Revelation was written at the same time period as 1 and 2 Peter, at the exact same time frame. And that the audience, the congregation in which they arose might have been the same, because the theology is so similar. Yeah, that's one of the exact reasons. So I agree with you. I think that they go hand in hand.
So it's almost worrisome.
Well, if you read 1 and 2 Peter, and notice in 1 and 2 Peter, remember he talks about, he says, honor the emperor, but fear God. So there's a lot of images about what to do when the government's coming. So many scholars would argue, well, that's a long, and I'm not trying to debunk maybe you don't find this compelling. Most New Testament scholars don't think Peter wrote 1 and 2 Peter because of that kind of stuff. That is, in the time of Peter, when the government would not have noticed that Christians were separate from Jews at all. We know at least by AD 64 that's happened because AD 49, that's at 49, because Claudius, the emperor, AD 49, kicked out all the Jews from Rome out of the instigation of one Christus, which is probably a Latin corruption of Christ. He kicks them all out. In other words, there are probably Christians and Jews who are fighting back and forth. At the time, and by 849, they can't tell the difference who's a Christian, who's not, because they're all Jew and some Gentile. So he kicks them all out, self-arguing. And Aquila and Priscilla, they come from, Prisca and Aquila, they come from that kicked out. So we know at least by close to 50, well, Peter's still alive in AD 50, almost certainly. He's probably in his 40s, upper 30s, 40s. By then, they still can't distinguish. So the government's not fighting against the Christians. So by the time Peter writes, though, he's got 1 Peter, the author of 1 Peter, is clearly talking about struggles with the government, fighting against, he's encouraging the Christians, you honor the governor, do what you can, honor the emperor, and so forth. So the question lies in, if it really is the Apostle Peter, and he's written that in his lifetime, I mean, that can be no later than, what, the 60s maybe, because after that, the legend is he gets killed. Even not, he'd be an old man in that time period to get in his 50s and 60s. Most people didn't live that long. And so then the question is it, how historically likely is it by the 60s, the government, that the Christians need to be really encouraged how to act toward the Romans? And I don't know, it goes back and forth. So I have arguments on both sides for that. I'll stop there. I don't want to get too bogged down. But I agree, it's good to read Revelation.
It talks about the Christians being sealed.
Yes, Christians being sealed.
So where is God in all the rest of this?
Where's God? Where is God in all the rest of this? He's still in the throne, on the throne. Go back to 8:2.
Is he causing it?
God is God causing it. Yes, by divine fiat, by divine command. By divine command. There are intermediaries to the implementation, but it's by divine fiat. So in 8:2, when he says, I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, 7 trumpets were given to them. So remember that the original vision is that he's in the throne room of God. Go all the way back to Revelation chapter 4. He says, come up hither and I'll show you something. Well, he shows, remember that picture I showed for a long time? He's in the throne room. So everything he sees starts from the throne room. One time he sees the Lamb on the throne popping off seals off a scroll. And after that happens, or maybe simultaneously, then he sees in the same throne room some angels, here you go, pop, pop, give him some trumpets. They start blowing. And then he has visions of tribulation. But he never leaves the throne room. He's having visions of that. So if we picture that, then we should, in my view, we should always remember God's still on the throne. By fiat, this is what God's will is upon the earth. Is he the direct cause of it? John's saying no, because he gives that to other angels, to trumpets, to so forth. Creatures, locusts, lions, and bears. But he commanded it. He commanded it. Maybe not for you, but I'll tell you what, 90 minutes goes by in a hurry for me. Well, I don't want to keep, I mean, I do, but I'm going to stop there and because of time. I wanted to get through 11, but hopefully those questions were worth your time. I hope so. We didn't do the little, what Tauber calls an interlude. If you'll just read that on your own, the eating of the little scroll, I said last week, remember from Ezekiel? Ezekiel eats a scroll and it tastes like honey. It's a congenial judgment. But he eats the scroll, it tastes bittersweet. It's sweet because we get vindicated if you win. It's bitter because if you don't win, the Christians are going to get some junk going to happen to them. They got to withstand it.
It turned his stomach sour.
It turned his stomach sour. He doesn't want to tell the message that Christians are going to get, you've got to stay faithful, it's coming. That leading little scroll is just so again, that's another analogy from Ezekiel. He's received a word from God, and boy, he didn't want to tell it. And I understand it as a preacher today, quite frankly. I can relate very, very well to the bitter, sweet taste of Scripture coming out of my mouth to a congregation. He measures the temple of God. That's people. We are the temple of God. He just uses a metaphor for measuring it. This might sound weird, but measuring is like sealing. It's like sealing it. Not sealing, but sealing it. So he takes out this rod and he measures it. And of course, here later on it'll be a cube. It's just like saying he's going to divinely, spiritually protect it. He just does. It comes from the Old Testament. Anyway, the 2 witnesses in chapter 11, he uses the Old Testament, Moses and Elijah as the great 2 witnesses. but they stand for the church. The church is the witness of the proclamation to the world. The church. But it's only 2 witnesses instead of all the churches, only 2 lamps, not all 7 of them, because 2 of them in their proclamation will eventually die for it. That is, a portion of the Christians will die a martyrdom death, but they boldly declare it. And no one can hurt them until finally, as time is 3.5 years, just means in perfect time. So the appearing of the 2 witnesses represents the church declaring to the world, and eventually you're going to die. And that's why it's bittersweet. The bittersweet scroll is, I'm telling you, you're about to hear a message. Some of y'all are going to give testimony, and it's going to be great for a while because no one's going to hurt you. And then at the end of chapter 11, it says, but eventually you will. Eventually they're going to kill you for it. Not all the lampstands, not all the lamps get killed, but 2 of the point is a portion. So it's bittersweet. Some of you will be faithful to the bitter end, and you'll die for it. And then the 7th trumpet sounded. So
You say won't be faithful?
some of y'all will be faithful to the bitter end. Some of you won't die for it. Some of you won't die for it. That's what I'm sorry. Whatever I said, I meant to won't die. Now, you can read it for yourself, and do read it for yourself. That's just a snapshot of how fast that goes. Coming back to life is the resurrection. Most interpreters read that as a resurrection. That you'll be killed, but you're going to come back. And the 3.5 years is is it 3.5 days or 3.5 years? Days, right? Because before, they proclaimed for 3.5 years. That's from Daniel. Anyway, it's just the point is it's this time period. That lasts for a while, and they have tribulation for 3.5 years. He says months and days and whatever. But when they die, 3.5 days later, in other words, you will be vindicated very quickly. Martyrs will be vindicated very quickly. It's a foretaste. I said this at the very beginning when I started. It's a foretaste of what he'll say later on chapters. He's going to unpack it more. The martyrs do get resurrected first. So he throws them a seed. Some of you are going to die, but you're going to be resurrected quickly. Then later on,
It's a guaranteed seal.
it's a guaranteed seal. It is a guaranteed seal.